Emissions of greenhouse gases need to
The
peak.
Earth is dying.
Climate change is among the biggest problems.
And it was the hottest April.
Global economic losses from climate-related natural disasters.
The Earth is warming up, and humans are at least partially to blame. The world's climate has already changed measurably in response to accumulating greenhouse gas emissions. These changes, as well as projected future disruptions, have prompted intense research into the nature of the problem and potential policy solutions. Global warming has remained one of the most concerning topics over the past 2 decades, and we can safely say that global warming isn't a prediction, it's happening. A long-term heating of Earth's climate system has been observed since the pre-industrial period between 1850 and 1900, due to human activities, primarily fossil fuel burning, which increases heat-trapping greenhouse gas levels in Earth's atmosphere. Since the Industrial Revolution, the global annual temperature has increased in total by a little more than 1 degree Celsius, or about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Between 1880, the year that accurate record-keeping began, and 1980, it rose on average by 0.07 degrees Celsius, 0.13 degrees Fahrenheit, every 10 years. Since 1981, however, the rate of increase has more than doubled. For the last 40 years, we've seen the global annual temperature rise by 0.18 degrees Celsius or 0.32 degrees Fahrenheit per decade. What's the result? A planet that has never been hotter. 9 of the 10 warmest years since 1880 have occurred since 2005, and the 5 warmest years on record all occurred since 2015. In 2018, the 4th National Climate Assessment warned that if we do not impede on greenhouse gas emissions and start to adapt, climate change could seriously disrupt the US economy. Warmer temperatures, sea level rise, and extreme weather will damage property and critical infrastructure, impact human health and productivity, and negatively affect sectors such as agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and tourism. The demand for energy will increase as power generation becomes less reliable, and water supplies will be stressed. Another report examined how climate change could affect 22 different sectors of the economy under 2 different scenarios. If global temperatures rose 2.8 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels by 2100, and if they increased by 4.5 degrees Celsius. The study said that if the higher temperature scenario prevails, climate change impacts on these 22 sectors could cost the US $520 billion each year. If we can keep to 2.8 degrees Celsius, it would cost $224 billion less. In any case, the US stands to suffer large economic losses due to climate change, second only to India, according to another study. Despite worldwide policy efforts, the emission of greenhouse gases remains a negative externality. So in this video, we will further explore how global warming is likely to impact global economics, agriculture, and food security. In the long list of potential problems from global warming, the risks to world agriculture stand out as among the most important. It has been widely recognized that developing countries in general stand to lose more from the effects of global warming on agriculture than industrial countries. Most developing countries have less capacity to adapt than their wealthier neighbors. Most are in warmer parts of the globe, where temperatures are already close to or beyond thresholds, at which further warming will reduce rather than increase agricultural output. In countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam, rising sea levels pose a threat to food security. As the salt water is more likely to flood coastal farmlands, it is also more likely to kill off rice crops. Half of Vietnam's national rice production is centered on the Mekong Delta region, which means that a flood in this region, roughly the size of Maryland, could impact both the country's food security and economy. Decreases food nutritional value. Global warming can adversely affect the nutritional value of food that is grown. Studies show that higher carbon dioxide concentrations reduce the protein, zinc, and iron content of crops. By 2050, an estimated additional 175 million people could have zinc deficiencies, which can, among other things, make them more susceptible to illnesses, and an additional 122 million people could be protein deficient. Communities relying largely on plant harvest for their nutrition will, again, feel this most acutely. Increases food waste. Rain doesn't guarantee healthy crops either. Higher rainfalls or flooding can produce toxic mold on crops. Crops grown in high drought areas that are then moved into humid storage facilities are vulnerable to fungal infections or pests. The more climate changes and the more that extreme climate events become commonplace, the more food we lose on an annual basis. According to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, roughly 1/3 of the food produced by farmers is lost between the field and the market in low and middle income countries. In high income countries, a similar amount is wasted between the market and the table. Currently, the food system contributes 21 to 37% of greenhouse gases, meaning that these food losses add to the climate crisis but do nothing for food security or malnutrition levels. Sea level rise and coastal growth impact. Climate change is likely to accelerate the historical rise in sea level through warming of oceans and melting of ice, which in turn will affect coastal development, wetland resources, and recreation along the coast. Low-lying developed areas in the Gulf Coast, the South, and the Mid-Atlantic regions are especially at risk from sea level rise. The rapid growth of coastal areas in the last few decades has resulted in larger populations and more valuable coastal property being at risk from sea level rise. This growth, which is expected to continue, brings with it a greater likelihood of increased property damage in coastal areas. Drought. Global warming increases the odds of worsening drought in many parts of the United States and the world. Regions such as the US Southwest, where droughts are expected to get more frequent, intense, and longer lasting, are at particular risk. But the question arises, how does global warming contribute to drought? Warmer temperatures enhance evaporation, which reduces surface water and dries out soils and vegetation. This makes periods with low precipitation drier than they would be in cooler conditions. Ultimately, it can lower river water level, affect livestock and crops, and can raise concerns about the reliability of electricity production from plants that require cooling water to maintain safe operations. In 2015, scientists concluded that a lengthy drought in California, the state's worst water shortage in 1,200 years, had been intensified by 15 to 20% by global warming. They also said the odds of similar droughts happening in the future had roughly doubled over the past century. And in 2016, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine announced that we can now confidently attribute some extreme weather events, like heat waves, droughts, and heavy precipitation, directly to climate change. Market failure. Conventional economists acknowledge that emissions of greenhouse gases and pollutants are an inevitable byproduct of growth. Given the technologies at their disposal, firms will pollute as they increase their production of goods and services. In determining how much to produce, firms weigh their private benefits against their private costs. They ignore the social costs of their production. They do not factor in the cost of polluting the environment. If firms operate without internalizing the costs of pollution, they will produce socially inefficient levels of goods and services. If unpriced emission of greenhouse gases imposes real costs on future generations, both present and future generations can enjoy a higher consumption of economic goods and services through the correction of this unpriced externality. So there is no real economic opportunity cost to mitigate global warming. Though everyone is affected by climate change, not everyone is affected equally. Indigenous people, people of color, and the economically marginalized are typically hit the hardest. Inequities built into our housing, healthcare, and labor systems make these communities more vulnerable to the worst impacts of climate change, even though these same communities have done the least to contribute to it. Is global warming a crisis? The Earth's ocean temperatures are getting warmer too, which means that tropical storms can pick up more energy. In other words, global warming can turn a Category 3 storm into a more dangerous Category 4 storm. In fact, scientists have found that the frequency of North Atlantic hurricanes has increased since the early 1980s, as has the number of storms that reach Categories 4 and 5. The 2020 Atlantic hurricane season included a record-breaking 30 tropical storms, 6 major hurricanes, and 13 hurricanes altogether. With increased intensity comes increased damage and death. The United States saw an unprecedented 22 weather and climate disasters that caused at least $1 billion worth of damage in 2020, but 2017 was the costliest on record and among the deadliest as well. Taken together, that year's tropical storms, including Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria, caused nearly $300 billion in damage and led to more than 3,300 fatalities. Now, climate scientists have concluded that we must limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2040 if we are to avoid a future in which everyday life around the world is marked by its worst, most devastating effects: the extreme droughts, wildfires, floods, tropical storms, and other disasters that we refer to collectively as climate change. The impacts of global warming are being felt everywhere. extreme heat waves have caused tens of thousands of deaths around the world in recent years. And in an alarming sign of events to come, Antarctica has lost nearly 4 trillion metric tons of ice since the 1990s. The rate of loss could speed up if we keep burning fossil fuels at our current pace. Some experts say causing sea levels to rise several meters in the next 50 to 150 years and wreaking havoc on coastal communities worldwide. Each year, scientists learn more about the consequences of global warming, and each year we also gain new evidence of its devastating impact on people and the planet. As the heat waves, droughts, and floods associated with climate change become more frequent and more intense, communities suffer and death tolls rise. If we're unable to reduce our emissions, scientists believe that climate change could lead to the deaths of more than 250,000 people around the globe every year and force 100 million people into poverty by 2030. Sadly, this is not a trend that appears to be going away anytime soon. If global warming is a real economic problem, there is no economic cost to correct it. In principle, the costs of reducing emissions in the current generation can be shifted to the future generations who will benefit from a cooler planet by reducing conventional investment. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for watching.